There is a quiet power in walking away without noise, without drama, without explanation. Most people believe strength is loud. They think power is proving a point, winning arguments, or making others feel their absence instantly. But Stoicism teaches something far deeper. True power is silent, controlled, and deliberate. When you disappear silently, you don't just leave, you create space. And in that space, people are forced to confront your absence. First, understand this. Not everyone deserves access to you. In life, many people take your presence for granted. They get used to your attention, your energy, your consistency. And because you are always there, they begin to believe you will always be there. There was a man who always checked on his friends. Every day he called, sent messages, showed support. One day he stopped. No announcement. No argument. Just silence. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, those same friends began to reach out. Not because they suddenly changed, but because they felt the void he left behind. Your absence reveals your value more than your presence ever could. Second, silence creates curiosity. When you argue, explain, or try to fix everything, people become comfortable. They understand your patterns. But when you withdraw without explanation, it disrupts their expectations. They start asking questions they never cared to ask before. A woman once ignored how her partner always tried to communicate. He would explain, justify, and try to fix things. She never took him seriously. One day, he stopped talking. No arguments, no emotional reactions, just calm distance. Suddenly, she became restless. She started wondering what changed, what she lost, what she didn't appreciate. Silence forces reflection. Noise only creates resistance. Third, you protect your energy. Stoicism teaches us that not everything deserves our reaction. When you constantly respond, chase, or prove yourself, you drain your mental strength. But when you step back, you regain control over your emotions. There was a young man constantly disrespected at work. He tried to defend himself every time, explaining why he deserved better treatment. It never worked. One day, he stopped reacting. He focused on his work, improved himself quietly, and eventually moved on to a better opportunity. The same people who ignored him began to respect him once he was gone. Your energy is your greatest asset. Guard it. Fourth, absence exposes true intentions. When you disappear, you see who values you and who only valued what you gave. Some people will reach out genuinely. Others will remain silent because they never truly cared. A man helped everyone around him, friends, family, colleagues. But when he faced difficulties, no one showed up. So he withdrew. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. In his absence, he realized who checked on him and who didn't. That moment changed how he gave his time and energy forever. Not everyone deserves your loyalty. And silence helps you see that clearly. Fifth, you become stronger in solitude. Walking away is not just about others, it's about you. It's about building yourself without distractions, without validation, without noise. A boy once felt invisible in his circle. He was always overlooked. Instead of forcing attention, he distanced himself. He spent time learning, growing, improving his mindset and discipline. Months later, when he returned, he wasn't the same person. He didn't need their approval anymore, and ironically, that's when they started noticing him. Growth happens in silence, not in constant attention. Sixth, people respect what they can lose. When you are always available, always forgiving, always present, people unconsciously devalue you. But when you show that you can walk away, that you are not dependent, they begin to see you differently. There was a man who tolerated disrespect in a relationship for years. He feared losing the person. One day, he chose himself and left quietly. No insults, no revenge, just distance. That same person who disrespected him began to regret everything. They reached out, apologized, tried to reconnect. But by then, he had already outgrown the need. Respect grows where fear of loss exists. Seventh, silence is self-respect. Stoicism teaches us not to beg, not to chase, not to lose ourselves trying to keep others. When you walk away calmly, you are telling the world, and yourself, that you know your worth. A woman constantly tried to prove her value in a friendship. She gave her time, attention, and care, but received little in return. One day, she stopped reaching out. She didn't block or argue, she just disappeared. Over time, she realized something powerful: peace replaced the stress she once felt. Sometimes leaving is not loss, it's freedom. In the end, disappearing silently is not about revenge. It's not about making others suffer. It's about choosing yourself. Let them wonder. Let them question. Let them feel your absence. Because the truth is simple. People often realize your value only after you're gone. 8th, time reveals everything. When you step away, you allow time to do what arguments never could: expose truth. People's actions over time will show you exactly where you stand in their lives. There was a man who always felt unsure about his place in someone's life. Words told him he mattered, but actions said otherwise. Instead of confronting repeatedly, he stepped back. Weeks turned into months, and the silence from the other side became his answer. No confusion. No mixed signals. Just clarity. Time doesn't lie. And distance allows you to see clearly. 9th, you break emotional dependency. Many people stay where they are not valued because they become emotionally attached. They rely on others for validation, attention, or a sense of identity. But Stoicism teaches independence, emotional self-sufficiency. A young woman once checked her phone constantly, waiting for messages that rarely came. Her mood depended on someone else's attention. One day, she decided to stop. She reduced contact, focused on herself, and slowly detached. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost empty. But over time, she found peace in not needing constant validation. Freedom begins when you stop depending on others to feel complete. 10th, silence builds discipline. It's easy to react. It's easy to explain yourself. It's easy to chase closure. But it takes discipline to stay silent, to walk away, and to control your emotions when everything inside you wants to speak. There was a man who was insulted publicly. His first instinct was to respond, defend himself, and prove his worth. But instead, he stayed quiet. He walked away and focused on his growth. Months later, his success spoke louder than any argument ever could. Discipline is choosing long-term respect over short-term satisfaction. 11th, you stop feeding disrespect. Every time you tolerate poor treatment and still remain available, you indirectly teach people that it's acceptable. Your silence, when paired with distance, sends a stronger message than any words. A worker was constantly given extra tasks without recognition. He complained, but nothing changed. One day, he stopped overextending himself. He did his job, nothing more. When his extra effort disappeared, management noticed. They began to value what they once overlooked. People don't appreciate what they think is unlimited. 12th, you gain inner peace. Noise creates stress. Arguments drain you. Trying to be understood by people who refuse to understand you is exhausting. Silence removes you from that cycle. There was a man who constantly argued with a friend over small misunderstandings. Every conversation turned into tension. Eventually, he chose peace over connection and stepped away. At first, he missed the friendship, but what he gained was calmness, clarity, and emotional stability. Peace is expensive. Stop giving it away cheaply. 13th, your actions speak louder than explanations. Explaining yourself repeatedly often weakens your position. It shows you are seeking approval or understanding from those who may not even value it. But when you act, when you leave, when you change, when you grow, you communicate without words. A woman kept telling her partner she deserved better treatment. Nothing changed. One day, she stopped talking about it and simply left. That single action said everything she had been trying to explain for years. Actions end conversations that words cannot. 14th, you create mystery. When you disappear without drama, you become unpredictable. People are used to patterns. They expect reactions. When you break that pattern, they become curious. A man who always responded instantly suddenly became distant. He no longer explained himself or sought attention. The same people who once ignored him started wondering about him, talking about him, and trying to figure him out. Mystery attracts attention. Predictability loses it. 15th, you stop wasting time. Time is the one thing you can never recover. Staying in places where you are not valued is not loyalty, it's self-neglect. Walking away allows you to invest your time in growth, purpose, and people who truly matter. There was a young man who stayed in a one-sided friendship for years. He gave his time freely but received little in return. One day, he chose to walk away. He used that same time to build skills, improve himself, and create new opportunities. Looking back, he realized the biggest loss wasn't the friendship. It was the time he wasted trying to fix it. Your time is your life. Spend it wisely. 16th, you become emotionally untouchable. When you master silence and detachment, you reach a level where people can no longer easily affect your emotions. Their words, actions, or absence lose power over you. A woman once felt hurt by every small change in someone's behavior. If they were distant, she felt anxious. If they were cold, she felt rejected. But after learning to detach, she stopped reacting emotionally. She observed instead of absorbing. And in that moment, she became untouchable. Strength is not reacting to everything you feel. 17th, you reclaim your identity. Sometimes, in trying to keep others, you lose yourself. You adjust, compromise, and slowly become someone you don't recognize. Walking away gives you the space to rediscover who you truly are. There was a man who changed everything about himself to fit into a group. His opinions, his habits, even his values shifted. But he was never fully accepted. When he finally stepped away, he began reconnecting with his true self. Over time, he became more confident, not because others approved, but because he was authentic again. You were not created to fit into spaces that shrink you. 18th, regret grows in your absence. People often don't realize what they had until it's gone. Your silence creates a space where memories replace your presence. And in that space, regret begins to grow. A woman ignored a loyal partner who always showed up for her. She assumed he would never leave. When he finally walked away quietly, she felt relief at first. But over time, she started remembering the consistency, the care, the presence he provided. And slowly, regret replaced indifference. Absence turns memories into lessons. 19th, you set a standard. When you walk away from disrespect, you set a clear standard, not just for others, but for yourself. You define what you will and will not tolerate. A man once allowed people to cancel plans on him repeatedly. He would always adjust and accept it. One day, he stopped making himself available to those who didn't respect his time. Slowly, his circle changed. The people around him began to value his time because he valued it first. Standards are not spoken. They are enforced. 20th, you grow beyond the need for validation. The highest level of Stoic strength is reaching a point where you no longer seek approval. You don't need people to understand you, agree with you, or validate your choices. There was a young man who constantly posted, spoke, and acted for attention. He wanted to be seen, liked, and approved. But over time, he realized that validation is temporary. He stepped back, focused on his own growth, and stopped seeking external approval. In that silence, he found confidence that didn't depend on anyone else. When you stop needing validation, you become powerful. In the end, disappearing silently is not weakness. It is not avoidance. It is not fear. It is control. It is awareness. It is strength. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to explain your absence. You don't need to prove your worth. Just step back. Focus on yourself. And let your absence speak. And when they finally notice, when they finally feel the silence you left behind, you will already be somewhere better, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. 21st, silence sharpens your awareness. When you remove yourself from constant interaction, distraction fades. You begin to notice patterns you once ignored, how people speak, how they act, how they treat you when you're no longer serving their needs. There was a man who was always surrounded by noise, friends, conversations, endless communication. He thought everything was fine. But when he stepped back and spent time alone, he started reflecting. He noticed who only reached out when they needed something. He saw who truly valued him. That awareness changed how he moved forever. Clarity doesn't come from noise. It comes from distance. 22nd, you stop over-explaining yourself. One of the biggest drains on your energy is constantly trying to make people understand you. Stoicism teaches that not everyone deserves an explanation. A woman always felt the need to justify her decisions, to friends, to family, to everyone. No matter what she did, someone misunderstood her. Eventually, she stopped explaining. She made her choices quietly and stood by them. Surprisingly, life became simpler. The opinions didn't stop, but they no longer controlled her. You don't need to explain your life to people committed to misunderstanding you. 23rd, you build quiet confidence. Confidence is not loud. It's not about proving anything. It's about knowing your worth without needing to announce it. There was a young man who used to boast about his plans, his goals, his next moves. He wanted recognition before results. But over time, he learned to move in silence. He worked without announcing, improved without seeking attention. When results came, they spoke for him. Confidence that is built in silence cannot be shaken by noise. 24th, you detach from outcomes. When you stop chasing people or forcing situations, you also stop tying your happiness to outcomes you can't control. A man once tried everything to make a relationship work. He adjusted, compromised, and gave endlessly. But the more he tried, the more frustrated he became. Eventually, he let go. He stopped trying to control the outcome. Whether things worked or not no longer defined his peace. Detachment is not giving up, it's letting go of what you cannot control. 25th, you become harder to manipulate. People often manipulate those who react emotionally. If someone knows how to trigger you, they can control your behavior. But silence removes that control. There was a colleague who always provoked reactions, subtle insults, passive comments, small jabs. Most people reacted immediately. But one man didn't. He stayed calm, unbothered, silent. Eventually, the provocations stopped, not because the colleague changed, but because they no longer had power over him. If they can't control your emotions, they can't control you. 26th, you create emotional space to heal. Sometimes, you don't walk away because of others, you walk away because you need to heal. A woman stayed in a situation that drained her emotionally. She felt tired, overwhelmed, and disconnected from herself. When she finally stepped away, she didn't rush into anything new. She gave herself time to think, to feel, to recover. Slowly, she became whole again. Healing requires distance. Constant presence delays it. 27th, you stop chasing closure. Many people stay stuck because they want answers, explanations, or closure from others. But the truth is, closure rarely comes from outside. There was a man who kept asking why things ended the way they did. He wanted answers, clarity, understanding. But he never received it. Eventually, he stopped asking. He accepted what happened and moved on without all the answers. And in doing that, he found peace. Closure is something you give yourself. 28th, you redefine your worth. When you stop allowing others to define your value based on how they treat you, you begin to see yourself differently. A young woman once believed her worth depended on how someone treated her. If they gave attention, she felt valuable. If they withdrew, she felt worthless. But after stepping away, she began working on herself. She built confidence from within, not from others. And for the first time, her worth felt stable. Your value does not decrease because someone fails to see it. 29th, you become selective. Silence and distance teach you to choose carefully who you allow into your life, who gets your time, who deserves your energy. There was a man who used to say yes to everyone. He wanted to be liked, accepted, included. But it left him drained. After stepping back, he became more selective. He chose quality over quantity. and his life became more peaceful. Not everyone deserves access to you. 30th, you evolve. At its core, disappearing silently is about transformation. It's about leaving behind the version of you that tolerated less, accepted less, and understood less. There was a boy who once feared being alone. He stayed in situations that didn't serve him just to avoid loneliness. But when he finally embraced solitude, he changed. He became stronger, wiser, more grounded. And when he returned to the world, he was no longer the same person. Sometimes you don't lose people. You outgrow them. In the end, silence is not empty. It is full of answers. When you disappear, you are not running away. You are returning to yourself. You are choosing peace over chaos. Growth over comfort. Strength over validation. Let them misunderstand you. Let them question you. Let them feel your absence. Because while they are trying to figure you out, you are becoming someone they can no longer reach. 31st, you stop reacting to everything. Not every message needs a reply. Not every action deserves your attention. Stoicism teaches restraint, the ability to choose when to respond and when to remain still. There was a man who used to reply instantly to every message, every comment, every provocation. His day was controlled by other people's actions. One day, he changed. He responded only when necessary. He ignored what didn't matter. And suddenly, his mind felt lighter. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. 32nd, you gain control over your emotions. When you step back, you create a gap between what happens and how you respond. In that gap lies your power. A woman once reacted emotionally to everything: tone of voice, delayed replies, small changes. It drained her. But after choosing silence and distance, she learned to pause, to observe before reacting. And over time, her emotions no longer controlled her decisions. Control your emotions, or they will control you. 33rd, you stop seeking attention. Attention can be addictive. The need to be seen, heard, and acknowledged often drives people to act out of character. But silence breaks that cycle. There was a young man who constantly posted, spoke loudly, and tried to stay relevant in every conversation. When he stepped away, at first it felt uncomfortable, like he was disappearing. But soon, he realized something powerful. He didn't need constant attention to exist. Real strength doesn't beg to be noticed. 34th, you become unpredictable. People get used to patterns. They expect you to react, to respond, to behave in certain ways. But when you move differently, when you choose silence over reaction, you break that pattern. A colleague always expected a certain reaction from a quiet worker: defensiveness, explanations, or frustration. But one day, the worker gave none of that. Just calm silence. Over time, the colleague stopped trying to provoke him. Predictability makes you easy to control. Silence makes you difficult to read. 35th, you protect your mental space. Your mind is constantly influenced by what you allow into it: conversations, opinions, drama. When you distance yourself, you protect that space. There was a man who spent hours every day engaging in gossip, arguments, and unnecessary discussions. His mind was always restless. When he stepped away from those circles, he noticed a change. His thoughts became clearer. His focus improved. Guard your mind like it matters, because it does. 36th, you learn patience. Walking away silently is not about immediate results. It's about trusting the process, knowing that clarity, growth, and even regret take time. A woman left a situation expecting instant peace and immediate answers. But instead, she faced silence and uncertainty. She stayed patient. And over time, everything made sense. The distance revealed what she couldn't see before. Patience reveals what urgency hides. 37th, you stop forcing connections. Not every relationship is meant to last. Some are temporary. Some are lessons. Silence helps you accept that without forcing what no longer fits. There was a man who kept trying to revive a fading friendship. He initiated conversations, made plans, and held on tightly. But it always felt one-sided. Eventually, he stopped forcing it. And in that silence, he realized it had already ended long ago. If it has to be forced, it's probably not meant for you. 38th, you become self-reliant. When you stop depending on others for emotional support, validation, or direction, you begin to rely on yourself. A young woman once needed constant reassurance from others. Decisions felt difficult without approval. But after stepping back, she began trusting her own judgment. Slowly, she became independent, not just physically, but emotionally. The strongest relationship you will ever have is with yourself. 39th, you stop overvaluing people. Sometimes, we place people on a pedestal. We see them as more important, more valuable, more necessary than they really are. Silence brings balance. There was a man who believed he couldn't function without someone in his life. He gave them too much importance. But when he stepped away, he realized something surprising. His life continued just fine. In fact, it improved. No one should be so important that you lose yourself. 40th, you embrace solitude. Solitude is often misunderstood as loneliness. But in Stoicism, solitude is a place of growth, reflection, and strength. There was a boy who feared being alone. Silence made him uncomfortable. But over time, he learned to sit with himself. To think, to reflect, to grow. And eventually, solitude became his strength, not his weakness. If you are comfortable alone, you are powerful everywhere. 41st, you stop chasing what doesn't choose you. Chasing people, attention, or validation only leads to frustration. Silence teaches you to move toward what moves toward you. A woman kept trying to gain someone's attention. She did everything, adjusted, waited, hoped. But nothing changed. When she finally stopped chasing, she realized how much energy she had wasted. And when she redirected that energy toward herself, her life improved. What is meant for you will not require constant chasing. 42nd, you build emotional resilience. Silence is not always easy. It can feel uncomfortable, even painful at times. But staying in it builds strength. There was a man who wanted to reach out every time he felt ignored. Silence felt like losing. But he stayed disciplined. Over time, that discomfort turned into strength. He no longer felt the urge to react immediately. Strength is built in moments of restraint. 43rd, you observe instead of absorbing. Not everything you see or hear needs to affect you. Silence allows you to step back and observe without taking everything personally. A worker used to take every comment to heart, every joke, every criticism. It affected his mood deeply. But after practicing detachment, he began observing instead of absorbing. And suddenly, those same comments lost their impact. You don't have to carry everything you hear. 44th, you become calmer. The less you engage in unnecessary conflict, the calmer your life becomes. There was a woman constantly involved in drama, arguments, misunderstandings, emotional tension. When she stepped away, her life became quieter. And in that quiet, she found peace she never thought was possible. Calmness is a choice, and silence helps you make it. 45th, you rise above pettiness. Not everything deserves your level. Silence is how you rise above small-minded behavior. There was a man who used to respond to every insult, every negative comment. It kept him stuck in cycles of conflict. But when he stopped engaging, he rose above it. And those who once tried to bring him down could no longer reach him. You don't rise by reacting, you rise by transcending. In the end, disappearing silently is not just an action. It is a transformation. You are no longer the person who reacts to everything. You are no longer the person who stays where you are not valued. You are no longer the person who needs to be understood by everyone. You become quieter, but stronger, more distant, but more at peace, less available, but more valuable. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them remember. Because while they are focused on your absence, you are focused on your evolution. 46th, you detach from chaos. Not every environment is healthy. Some places are filled with noise, negativity, and constant emotional tension. Silence allows you to step out of that chaos without fighting it. There was a man surrounded by constant drama, arguments, gossip, unnecessary conflict. He tried to fix it, to calm it, to change it. Nothing worked. One day, he simply removed himself. No announcements, no resistance. Just distance. And for the first time, his mind felt still. You don't need to fight chaos to escape it. You just need to leave. 47th, you stop proving your worth. Trying to prove your value to people who don't see it is a losing game. Silence is the moment you stop performing and start being. A woman constantly tried to show how loyal, kind, and supportive she was. She went above and beyond, hoping to be appreciated. But it was never enough. When she stopped trying, she realized something powerful. Those who value you don't need convincing. Your worth is not something you prove. It's something you carry. 48th, you gain emotional independence. When you no longer rely on others for happiness, validation, or peace, you become free. There was a young man whose mood depended entirely on how others treated him. If they were kind, he felt good. If they were distant, he felt low. But after stepping back and focusing on himself, he found stability within. His emotions no longer depended on external behavior. Freedom begins when your peace is self-generated. 49th, you reduce unnecessary stress. Much of the stress in life comes from interactions that don't truly matter. Arguments, misunderstandings, overthinking what others think. Silence cuts through that. A worker used to stress over every comment from colleagues, what they meant, how they said it, why they said it. It consumed his thoughts. But when he stopped engaging mentally and emotionally, that stress disappeared. Not everything deserves your mental energy. 50th, you learn the power of restraint. Restraint is one of the highest forms of discipline. It's knowing you can react, but choosing not to. There was a man insulted in front of others. He had the perfect response ready. He could have embarrassed the person instantly. But he chose silence. He walked away. Later, people respected him more for what he didn't say than for anything he could have said. Restraint is silent strength. 51st, you become less accessible. When you are always available, people take you for granted. But when your presence becomes limited, your value increases. A woman used to be available at all times, calls, messages, favors. People expected it. But when she reduced her availability, something changed. People began to respect her time more because it was no longer unlimited. Scarcity creates value. Even in your presence. 52nd, you strengthen your boundaries. Silence is a form of boundary. It's a way of saying no without needing to explain. There was a man who struggled to say no. He didn't want to disappoint people. So he said yes to everything, even when it hurt him. Eventually, he learned to step back instead of overcommitting. His silence became his boundary. You don't always need words to set limits. 53rd, you become more intentional. When you stop reacting impulsively, you start acting deliberately. Every move becomes a choice, not a reaction. A young woman used to act based on emotion, quick replies, quick decisions, quick reactions. But after practicing silence, she slowed down. She thought before acting. And her decisions improved. Intentional living begins with controlled responses. 54th, you outgrow validation cycles. Validation is temporary. It fades quickly and leaves you wanting more. Silence helps you step out of that endless cycle. There was a man who relied on praise to feel good. Without it, he felt empty. But after stepping away from constant interaction, he began finding satisfaction in his own progress, not in others' opinions. Self-validation is permanent. External validation is not. 55th, you stop reacting to disrespect. Disrespect often seeks a reaction. When you give none, it loses its purpose. There was a colleague who made subtle disrespectful remarks regularly. Most people reacted. One man didn't. He stayed calm, focused, silent. Over time, the remarks stopped, not because they became kind, but because they got no reaction. What you don't react to loses power over you. 56th, you become mentally stronger. Silence is not easy. It requires control, patience, and discipline. But through it, your mind becomes stronger. There was a young man who couldn't handle being ignored. It frustrated him deeply. But instead of reacting, he trained himself to stay still. Over time, what once triggered him no longer had any effect. Mental strength is built through control, not expression. 57th, you stop seeking constant reassurance. Needing reassurance keeps you dependent. Silence forces you to stand on your own understanding. A woman constantly asked others if she was doing the right thing. She needed approval for every step. But when she stepped back, she learned to trust herself. And that trust became her foundation. Trust yourself more than you seek reassurance. 58th, you refine your circle. When you distance yourself, your circle naturally changes. Some people drift away. Others come closer. There was a man who had many friends, but very few genuine connections. When he stepped back, many disappeared. But the few who remained proved their loyalty through consistency. Silence filters people without effort. 59th, you align with your purpose. Distractions often pull you away from your goals. Silence removes those distractions and helps you focus. A young man spent most of his time socializing, arguing, and engaging in meaningless conversations. His goals suffered. But when he stepped back, he redirected his time and energy toward his purpose. Slowly, his life began to change. Focus grows where distractions fade. 60th, you become unstoppable. When you no longer depend on others, no longer react impulsively, no longer seek validation, and no longer tolerate less, you reach a different level. There was a man who once needed approval, feared rejection, and avoided being alone. But through silence, distance, and discipline, he transformed. He became focused, calm, and self-reliant. And at that point, nothing external could shake him. When you master yourself, nothing can control you. In the end, disappearing silently is not about them. It was never about them. It's about you. Your peace. Your growth. Your discipline. Your power. You don't leave to make them regret. You leave to become better. And if regret comes, that's just a consequence of your absence. Stay silent. Stay disciplined. Stay focused. And keep evolving. 61st, you stop arguing with reality. Not everything will go your way. Not everyone will understand you. Silence teaches acceptance, the ability to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. There was a man who constantly fought reality. He argued with outcomes, resisted change, and tried to control everything. It only brought frustration. But when he stepped back and accepted what he couldn't control, his mind became lighter. Peace begins when you stop arguing with what is. 62nd, you conserve your strength. Every reaction, every explanation, every emotional response costs energy. Silence helps you conserve that energy for what truly matters. A young woman used to engage in every conversation, every debate, every issue around her. By the end of the day, she felt drained. When she began choosing silence, she noticed something different. She had more energy, more clarity, more focus. Not everything is worth your strength. 63rd, you become more observant. When you speak less, you notice more. You pick up on details, behaviors, and patterns that were once invisible. There was a man who always dominated conversations. He spoke more than he listened. But when he decided to step back and observe, he started noticing things. Who was genuine? Who wasn't? Who changed when circumstances changed? Observation reveals truth faster than conversation. 64th, you stop chasing explanations. Sometimes, people won't give you the answers you want. And even if they do, it may not satisfy you. Silence helps you move forward without needing full understanding. A woman kept asking why someone treated her differently. She wanted answers, clarity, closure. But she never got it. Eventually, she stopped asking and started moving on. And in that decision, she found more peace than any explanation could give her. Not every question needs an answer to move on. 65th, you strengthen your self-respect. Every time you walk away from something that disrespects you, you reinforce your value to yourself. There was a man who tolerated being spoken to poorly just to maintain a connection. But when he finally chose to step away, he felt something new: self-respect. It was uncomfortable at first, but it was necessary. Self-respect grows when you stop accepting less. 66. You remove emotional clutter. Too many voices, too many opinions, too many distractions, these create noise in your mind. Silence clears that clutter. A young man was constantly overwhelmed, not because of his problems, but because of the noise around him. When he stepped away from unnecessary conversations and influences, his thoughts became clearer. A clear mind makes better decisions. 67th. You stop reacting out of habit. Many reactions are automatic. You respond the way you always have, without thinking. Silence breaks that cycle. There was a woman who always responded immediately, defending, explaining, reacting. But when she started pausing, choosing silence, she realized she didn't need to respond to everything. You are not your habits. You can change them. 68th. You learn emotional discipline. Discipline is not just about actions, it's about emotions. Silence teaches you to feel without reacting. A man once believed he had to express every emotion immediately. Anger, frustration, disappointment, it all came out instantly. But over time, he learned to sit with those emotions instead of reacting. And in doing so, he gained control. Feel everything. React to nothing unnecessarily. 69th. You reduce regret. Most regrets come from things said in the heat of the moment. Silence protects you from that. There was a young man who often said things he later wished he hadn't. In arguments, he spoke without thinking. But when he learned to stay silent in those moments, his regrets decreased. Sometimes, the best response is no response. 70th. You build inner stability. When your peace no longer depends on others, you become stable, emotionally and mentally. A woman once felt like her world shifted based on how others treated her. But after practicing silence and detachment, she became grounded. Her peace was no longer fragile. Stability comes from within, not from others. 71st. You stop trying to control people. You cannot control how others think, act, or feel. Silence helps you accept that and focus on what you can control: yourself. There was a man who constantly tried to change people's behavior toward him. He explained, corrected, and insisted. Nothing worked. When he stopped trying to control others and focused on himself, everything became simpler. Control yourself. That's enough. 72nd. You become more resilient. Every moment of silence, every act of restraint, builds resilience. There was a young woman who struggled with rejection. It affected her deeply. But as she practiced detachment, she became stronger. Rejection no longer broke her, it simply redirected her. Resilience is built through experience and control. 73rd. You stop over-investing emotionally. Not every situation deserves your full emotional involvement. Silence helps you invest wisely. A man once gave his full attention and emotion to every connection. It left him exhausted. But when he became more selective, his emotional energy lasted longer. Invest your emotions where they are valued. 74th. You gain perspective. Distance changes how you see things. What once felt important may no longer matter. There was a woman who was deeply affected by a conflict. It consumed her thoughts. But after stepping away, she realized it wasn't as important as she thought. Distance shrinks problems to their true size. 75th. You learn when to let go. Holding on is often harder than letting go. Silence helps you release what no longer serves you. There was a man who held on to a connection long after it stopped benefiting him. He feared letting go. But when he finally did, he felt relief. Letting go is not losing, it's freeing yourself. 76th. You stop seeking constant interaction. Not every moment needs to be filled with conversation. Silence becomes comfortable. A young man once felt uneasy in quiet moments. He needed noise, interaction, engagement. But over time, he learned to sit in silence without discomfort. Silence is only uncomfortable when you are not used to yourself. 77th. You strengthen your independence. Independence is not just physical, it's mental and emotional. A woman once depended on others for decisions, support, and direction. But through distance and reflection, she became independent. Independence is strength in its purest form. 78th, you become more grounded. Silence keeps you centered. It prevents you from being pulled in every direction. There was a man who reacted to everything around him. His mood shifted constantly. But when he practiced silence, he became grounded. Stay centered, no matter what happens around you. 79th, you stop wasting words. Words lose value when overused. Silence makes them meaningful again. A woman who spoke less noticed something interesting. When she did speak, people listened more. Speak less. Mean more. 80th, you become your own validation. At the highest level, you no longer need others to confirm your worth. There was a man who once needed approval for everything. But through silence, growth, and self-reflection, he reached a point where his own standards were enough. When you validate yourself, no one can take your confidence away. In the end, silence is not emptiness. It is discipline. It is control. It is power. You disappear. Not to be found, but to rebuild. And when you return, if you return, you are no longer the same. Stronger. Calmer. Untouchable. 81st, you stop seeking approval. The need for approval keeps you trapped. It makes you adjust your behavior, your words, even your identity just to be accepted. Silence breaks that need. There was a young man who constantly looked for approval, from friends, from family, from everyone. Every decision he made was influenced by how others would react. But when he stepped back and stopped explaining himself, he realized something freeing: approval was never necessary. You don't need permission to be yourself. 82nd, you learn to be misunderstood. Not everyone will understand your silence. Some will misinterpret it. Some will assume the worst. But Stoicism teaches you to accept that. There was a woman who stopped engaging in unnecessary conversations. People began to call her distant, cold, even arrogant. At first, it bothered her. But over time, she accepted it. She realized that being misunderstood was a small price to pay for peace. You can be at peace without being understood. 83rd, you break the need to be liked. Trying to be liked by everyone is exhausting and impossible. Silence helps you let go of that need. There was a man who always tried to please everyone. He avoided conflict, agreed with things he didn't believe in, and suppressed his true self. But when he stepped back, he stopped trying to be liked. And in doing so, he became more authentic. You are not here to be liked by everyone. 84th, you gain respect through distance. Respect often grows when you are not constantly available. When people can't easily access you, they begin to value your presence more. A colleague who was always present, always helpful, was often overlooked. But when he reduced his availability and focused on himself, people began to respect his time and effort more. Respect increases when access decreases. 85th, you learn the art of letting things be. Not everything needs fixing. Not everything needs your involvement. Silence teaches acceptance. There was a woman who tried to fix every problem in her circle. It drained her. When she stepped back and allowed things to unfold without her intervention, she realized not everything needed her effort. Sometimes, the best action is no action. 86th, you stop giving reactions for free. Your reactions are valuable. Giving them away freely reduces their impact. There was a man who reacted to everything: jokes, comments, criticism. People knew how to trigger him easily. But when he stopped reacting, those same triggers lost their power. Make people earn your reactions. 87th, you develop emotional intelligence. Silence gives you time to understand your emotions instead of being controlled by them. A young woman once reacted impulsively. But through silence and reflection, she began to understand why she felt the way she did. And that understanding gave her control. Awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence. 88th, you avoid unnecessary conflict. Many conflicts exist only because both sides keep engaging. Silence ends that cycle. There was a man who often found himself in arguments. But when he chose not to engage, many of those conflicts simply disappeared. Not every conflict deserves your participation. 89th, you strengthen your focus. Distractions pull your attention in different directions. Silence helps you bring it back. A young man struggled to focus on his goals because he was constantly engaged in conversations and distractions. When he stepped back, his focus sharpened. Focus grows in quiet environments. 90th, you stop chasing attention. Attention is temporary. It fades quickly. Silence helps you focus on what truly matters. There was a woman who constantly sought attention, through social media, conversations, and validation. But when she stepped back, she realized how empty it felt. Attention is cheap. Purpose is valuable. 91st, you become more intentional with your words. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. There was a man who used to speak constantly. People often ignored him. But when he became more selective with his words, people began to listen. Speak with purpose, not just to be heard. 92nd, you detach from external noise. Opinions, judgments, and expectations can cloud your thinking. Silence helps you detach from that. A woman once felt overwhelmed by what others thought of her. But after stepping back, she stopped listening to external noise and started trusting herself. Your path doesn't need approval. 93rd, you learn to sit with discomfort. Silence can feel uncomfortable at first. But sitting with that discomfort builds strength. There was a young man who felt the urge to reach out every time he felt lonely. But instead, he stayed in that silence. Over time, the discomfort faded. Growth often feels uncomfortable at first. 94th, you stop explaining your value. Your value should be seen, not explained. A man constantly tried to prove his worth in relationships and work. But when he stopped explaining and started acting, everything changed. Those who see your value don't need explanations. 95th, you become less reactive. Reactivity is weakness. Control is strength. There was a woman who reacted to every small thing. But through silence, she learned to pause, to think, to choose her response. Control creates strength. 96th, you gain deeper self-awareness. Silence forces you to face yourself, your thoughts, your habits, your patterns. A young man avoided being alone because it made him uncomfortable. But when he embraced silence, he began to understand himself better. Self-awareness is the beginning of growth. 97th, you stop wasting emotional energy. Your emotions are limited. Spend them wisely. There was a man who invested emotionally in everything. It drained him. But when he became selective, his energy lasted longer. Not everything deserves your feelings. 98th, you become more disciplined. Silence requires discipline. And discipline builds strength. A woman who practiced silence in difficult moments found herself becoming stronger in other areas of life too. Discipline in one area strengthens all areas. 99th, you rise above validation. At this level, you no longer seek approval, attention, or recognition. There was a man who once needed validation for everything. But through growth and silence, he reached a point where his own standards were enough. Validation from within is unshakable. 100th, you transform completely. Disappearing silently is not just about leaving, it's about becoming someone new. There was a boy who once feared being alone, feared being misunderstood, feared being forgotten. But through silence he changed. He became strong, calm, and independent. And when people looked for the old version of him, they couldn't find him. Because he no longer existed. In the end, you don't disappear to be noticed. You disappear to rebuild. And when you rebuild in silence, you return with power that doesn't need to be announced. Stay silent. Stay disciplined. Stay focused. And keep becoming. Follow me for more Stoic wisdom on self-mastery, discipline, and silent strength.